Hello and welcome back to CWU Live, where we have a transatlantic special for you today. Live from the United States, I'm joined by President of the American Postal Workers Union, Mark Dimondstein. Welcome to the show, Mark.
It's a pleasure to be here. Thanks so much for having me. Solidarity greetings to Brother Ward and all the officers and hardworking posties in Great Britain. Really glad to join you.
You've given the game away because also in our humble Wimbledon studio in South London, I'm joined by Dave Ward, General Secretary of the CWU. How are you doing, Dave?
Yeah, hi everybody. Really pleased to see you, Mark, and solidarity to all the American postal workers and to all your representatives in your great union.
So later today, we'll be talking about the struggles being fought by the American Postal Workers Union, what we can learn from them over here. And I'm not sure if you've heard, but there's also a presidential election in the United States in under 3 weeks. So I'll get Mark's thoughts on that. First, though, we have some industrial news from the UK. 450 CWU members work for Capita. They're contracted by the BBC to manage the licence fee. Now, Capita has failed to suggest any pay offer for 2024, and so the CWU have announced a ballot timetable. Andy Fury is Assistant Secretary for the CWU, responsible for Capita workers on the BBC contract. He's said this: industrial action is now a strong possibility unless a serious pay offer is forthcoming. This is the last thing we wanted, but sadly the failure of the business to make any pay offer at all in the 7 months since the 2024 pay settlement date left us with no alternative. We're still hoping, even at this late stage, that Capita will come forward with a reasonable proposal. Our hard-working members deserve fair recompense for the efforts they make all year round to provide this important service. But make no mistake, this ballot timetable will only be paused if there is fresh thinking on the part of the business. So laying a gauntlet down there. The CWU also has 750 members working on Capita's Tesco Mobile and Virgin Mobile O2 contracts. They aren't yet at the stage of balloting members, so at a different stage in the negotiations. But Tracy Fussy, who is responsibility in the union for those members, has said she is equally frustrated over the lack of progress on pay. In other news, TikTok, which employs many members of the United Tech and Allied Workers Union, which is a part of the CWU, is planning mass job cuts on moderation and safety teams. TikTok employs around 500 UK workers in the moderation division, and in a snap survey from the CWU, 125 out of 127 respondents said they had been told their jobs were at risk. The moderation team was sent an email from TikTok warning this: in recent years, our industry has faced increasing demands on our moderation efforts due to fluctuating volumes, growing complexity, and a wider range of harmful content and bad actors. To meet these evolving challenges, we are proposing to make some changes to our in-house moderation teams. TikTok, when they say some changes, as you can imagine, they mean some redundancies. That seems to be the case, and it seems as if what they want to do is replace human moderators with moderation done by artificial intelligence. This isn't just happening in the UK. 500 TikTok employees in Malaysia, again mostly working in moderation, have also just been told they'll be losing their jobs. One UK moderator told the Bureau of Investigative Journalists this: from the moment we saw the emails coming in, everyone started worrying. At first, they didn't mention the word redundant, but it was clear the news wasn't going to be good. Personally, I'm afraid there's more to come. Looking back, it seems like this was just a matter of time. Some roles were already moved to other countries where workers are paid much less than us. I'm worried I won't have enough for Christmas and possibly even my rent if I can't get hired quickly and run out of the little savings I have. I don't even earn that much to begin with. Of course, solidarity to everyone who is fearing redundancy at the moment. A horrible time of year for it, of course. Finally, the results are in for the political fund ballot for the CWU. So 79.7% of CWU members have voted yes in the political fund ballot. That means CWU members have backed their union having a voice in national politics. Dave, obviously lots going on when it comes to sort of industrial relations in the UK with CWU members. At the same time, a fairly resounding result when it comes to the political fund. Were you pleased with those results?
Yeah, we were pleased with it. We understand that people have different views about politics as to whether or not a trade union should be involved. We always respect that. But this was part of the anti-trade union laws. I mean, we already give individual members the opportunity to opt in, or they can opt out, rather, of the political levy. And actually, they have to opt in. So the starting position is you're out of it. And yet, you know, the government made it a law that every 10 years we had to ballot all our members to see if we want to have a political voice. Now, obviously, that's crucial. It's always crucial. There's been so many moments in our history where that's been very useful. We've got so much on the agenda at the moment. I mean, the New Deal for working people would not have been delivered if trade unions and the CWU, which were the founders of that campaign, did not actually have a political voice. Equally, there are some big issues coming up on the future of Royal Mail. We're actually having meetings in the last couple of weeks with the government, and we'll continue to talk to the government. And even today, you know, when you've got a political voice, you get invited to Downing Street, and you go there, and a few of us went there today to UC delegation to talk about the budget with the Chancellor. And we've probably had in the last, since Labour have been elected, we've probably had 6 or 7 meetings with different government officials and senior leaders of the government, along with sometimes other trade unions, but also on our own, talking about the issues that affect our members.
And are you confident that in those meetings they're genuinely listening, they're not sort of going through the motions?
I wouldn't go that far. I think they listen. No,
Somewhere in between.
They're somewhere in between, because the way I look at it is that you get the access, but you've got to make your case very strongly. But you've also got to listen to what the government's concerns are, and you've got to find a way through that. Mm-hmm. If you just go into those meetings and you believe that, you know, the fact that we've got a political voice, in our case, the fact that we're affiliated to the Labour Party means that the Labour Party have to do what we say, it doesn't work like that. And there are big challenges that the government are facing. And I think the best way is to be very clear on what you want to do, but also to understand their concerns and the challenges they're facing, and try and find a way through that. And that's what we always do every time we meet.
That's really interesting. Let's move on to our main discussion for the day, which is what we can learn from the United Postal Workers Union. Mark, sort of set the scene for us. Can you fill us in on, I suppose, what's most occupying your attention at the moment as leader of the UPWA?
Sure. Probably two main issues in the moment. One is we're in negotiations for a new collective bargaining agreement with the United States Postal Service. We're one of 4, the American Postal Workers Union is one of 4 postal unions in the United States. So we're behind you. We don't have an industrial union that represents all postal workers, and you've taken it further, which is even better, which you represent all communication workers union. But our union represents about 200,000 postal workers. It's the largest bargaining unit up for negotiations in the United States this year. So we're going to have an impact, not just the results will have an impact, not just on postal workers and our families, but the entire working class. And we know that, we know that negotiations are never easy. They never have been. They never will be. We enter a battlefield from 2 different sides. We try to find common ground where we can, but there's obviously many, many differences. Our contract, our main agreement covering the 200,000 postal workers, did expire on September 20th. We don't have the legal right to strike in the United States. It doesn't mean that we never have. We did in 1970, so we don't let any law take it away from us. But that's not in the cards right now. So we didn't have the hammer of no contract, no work. So we stopped the clock at 11:59 on September 20th, and we're continuing to bargain. We've made some progress, and on that basis, we thought it was in the best interest of our members to move forward. And if we don't get there with a voluntary new contract, we'll end up in what's called interest arbitration. Not the best place to be, because we lose control. We can't determine our outcome, and the members lose a vote and a say in what that outcome is. So that's going to be going on the next few months. It's consumed us in large part for the last year and more. Secondly, of course, we have a presidential election 3 weeks from now in the United States. And of course, that includes in the states, the Senate, the House of Representatives, many governor races, and things that impact the workers throughout the country. And that's a big challenge for us because in the United States, we're also behind you some. We don't have a Labor Party. I know that it's a constant battle to keep the Labor Party labor. But at least you have a Labor Party to be part of and to work within and to work to improve, to make more militant and more responsive to the needs of the workers. We have two parties that are generally represent the interest of Wall Street, represent the interest of corporate America. And we take a bipartisan approach to this. We support candidates who support unions, support postal workers, support the working class in general, and support union rights. So we're a little bit in a rock and a hard place. We're often faced with a lesser of two evil choices. As some say, the lesser evil is still evil. But we have a stark, as you do in Great Britain and through much of the world, we have a stark path in the road and choice here because we have a choice between what I think any honest observer would say is rising fascism, rising authoritarianism under the mantle of Donald Trump and the Make America Great Again movement, as they call it, or a mainstream Democrat, Kamala Harris, who at least has some real support for unions, for postal workers, for workers in general, and at least some common decency. So we have a challenge ahead of us. And as you know from reading the news, this election could go either way. And whichever way it goes, we're going to have our work cut out for us. But obviously, it'd be much more in the interest of postal workers to make sure that Donald Trump never gets near the White House again. Demagoguery, unfortunately, works. And it works when people are injured, and we are. The working class is struggling. There's a new militant mood in the working class in the United States, which is very good, but that's not necessarily translating into the political arena yet. And Dave, I was very pleased to hear your members' approach to being engaged in politics. We have some resistance in our own union. Why don't we just punch the clock, file our grievances, negotiate contracts, and go home and leave the politics to those who know more than workers? Well, guess what? Workers know best. And it's a huge mistake to narrow our work just to the four walls of the post office and just to the grievance procedure and just to our contracts. So we very much agree that workers need to be involved in the political arena. Even if it's not the best arena for us now, we always struggle to broaden it and make it better. But we definitely need to engage. And our political representatives who are elected have a huge impact on postal workers in the United States, and I'm sure also in Great Britain. So those are two of the big things. And then, of course, we're always in a fight with the post office around better staffing, better service, and those kind of things where we want the people to get the service that they deserve or promised under the law in the United States. And, of course, postal management is always trying to cut jobs, cut hours, save money, and that all comes not just the cost to the postal worker, but the cost to the postal customer.
And I suppose we'll come back to sort of trade unions and politics in a moment. I've got a clip of Donald Trump talking about you guys in the Postal Service Union that I'll get your commentary on in a while. I wanted to get some background, first of all, on the United States Postal Service. I've just been sort of reading about it the last couple of days because I knew you were coming on the show. Obviously, in the UK, our governments were successful at, unfortunately, privatising the post office and Royal Mail. Donald Trump tried in the United States in 2020 and he failed, didn't he? Can you talk about that?
Well, in 2018, so Donald Trump came into office in 2016, served 4 years in that presidency. And in 2018, they put out a report actually openly calling for, in writing, the breakup of the United States Postal Service, the privatization, selling off to corporations for their own private profits. But we were a key part of and proud of it, but not alone. of rallying the people of the country, many other allies, of course, the other postal unions, the labor movement, but far beyond the labor movement, the civil rights organizations, veteran rights organizations, women's organizations, and so on. Rural America organizations to resist any change to the postal system. And although we do not have a party, a political party of the working class in the United States, we do not have a labor party, there is a lot of bipartisan support for the public postal service, partly because some of the most conservative representatives come out of rural America. And rural America still, in many ways, has a deeper relationship to the public United States Postal Service and the ability to get that interaction and those communications, even if you're in the most remote areas of the country. So we have developed a lot of support, even though Trump at the time as president was promoting privatization. It didn't even resonate as deep as they had hoped within their own ranks. But basically what happened is the people of the country rose up and said, no, this belongs to us. We need it. We want it to thrive. We want it to move into the future. Granted, there's changes going on, but the post office is ours and we're going to defend it. So that threat's not going to go away, but we certainly beat it back. Wall Street always wants their hands on the money. The corporations always want their hands on the public till because this is public money. But we've held them at bay. It's going to be a continuing battle. But if Trump gets to the White House again, obviously that battle is going to heat up once again. So we're going to have to be very vigilant, and we hope we play a role in him not getting there. If he does get there, then we're going to have to continue to rally the workers and the people of the country.
I wanted to get your thoughts on this, Dave, because, you know, we think of the United States as a more free market country, as probably a more neoliberal country than our own. It's our country that sort of managed to actually privatize Royal Mail, I think against sort of public opinion, obviously against what the union wanted. Yeah. Why do you think it sort of succeeded here where it didn't succeed there?
I think one of the main reasons was that at the time, unfortunately, you know, we talked about a Labour Party, but the Labour Party at that particular point decided to take a policy under the then Business Secretary, Lord Mandelson, who decided that Royal Mail was a basket case. I remember the words exactly that he used, and he put forward as a Labour minister part privatisation plans. That came into the period where the election was due. The Tories, who had previously always been in the same position that Donald Trump has been in, which is privatise the post office, they put that forward that they were going to privatise the post office. And the Lib Dems went for a similar thing, saying that you've got to privatise the post office but give free shares to the workforce. And the reality was we didn't have, at that point, any political support within the mainstream political parties to stop privatisation. So, like Mark said, you try to make alliances with various organisations, but after defeating it on previous occasions, because that political backdrop changed fundamentally, we weren't able to stop the privatisation at that point. The election came, the Labour Party got kicked out, and the people who came in had the mandate effectively to privatise Royal Mail. What we were able to do, though, following a ballot of our members at the same time, which you can't legally ballot against privatisation, we balloted on the impact of privatisation on our members' terms and conditions. And we were able to successfully achieve an agreement that stopped many of the things that happen with privatisation, like the breakup of the company, like selling it off, like franchising delivery routes, like turning it into sort of gig economy terms and conditions. We were able to stop that. We were able to protect the universal service, and this is the strange place we've ended up in. So Royal Mail is a privately owned company, but in legislation, through the efforts of the union, we were able to secure that there is a universal service that has to be adhered to, and Royal Mail is the universal service provider. So we have kind of like a public-facing role, which we still say is a public service, in a private company. And Mark, just to share with you where that's got to now, is that a big thing that's occupying our thoughts at the moment. Obviously, our members' issues as they are at the moment in the offices where they work are very difficult, following the outcome of a dispute, and a very bitter dispute with our current employers. Many of them managers got sent on their way, but there's still a hardcore in the business that are not doing the right things, have no ambition for the company. But what we're now facing, Mark, is the potential of a takeover by a foreign equity investor in its entirety. And we are currently trying to see how we can engage the current government to be part of a discussion that protects the universal service, protects our members' jobs, terms and conditions, and also to engage with the prospective new owners. We could take a view that we shouldn't engage with them, but we don't think that's the right thing to do, because we know the current board have got no ambition for the future of the company, got no money to invest in the company. We want to try and see if there's a way through this where we can get an agreement that would effectively be groundbreaking in the UK, where workers can have a stake in the business, where the union can have a greater influence over the future direction of the company, where the customer can have a greater say in the governance of the company. And those conversations are ongoing, and we'll be talking to our members and our representatives about that in a bit more detail. But I think two different political backgrounds, but ultimately an interesting one in that, you didn't have that political support. I do think the demographic, the geography of America played a big part in that, in terms of the size of America,
Yes.
and the amount of rural support that you got, which is always plays to the sort of Trump position, where he basically got frightened off of going through with it. And I wish you all the success in your latest campaign. And of course, we hope that you defeat Donald Trump for all the things that he stands for, that we know he stands for. And I think you said something very important at the start of that any decent person observing what's going on in politics, not just in America or the UK, but across the world, sees this rise of populism, sees this rise of what we would call fascism, taking a grip on ordinary working class communities. And they are not wrong to be saying how many problems they face, and we need to unify working class people to defeat that type of political thinking. And trade unions have a great role in doing that, because it also then helps your members in work, and it helps them outside of work as well.
We talked about Donald Trump. He's come up a fair few times. Let's take it from the horse's mouth. Let's listen to Donald Trump talking about American postal workers. This is from a couple of weeks ago.
We have very bad elections. We have a bad voting system. We have mail-in ballots. And, it's very interesting. I read the other day the post office is saying how bad it is. The post office is critiquing themselves, saying we're really in bad shape. We can't deliver the mail. And they're not even talking about mail-in ballots, right? Where we're going to dump millions and millions of ballots. And I'm saying to myself, how can they be taking the vote, and they can't? They are saying they're in very bad shape, that they cannot deliver the mail well. And we're relying on them. And I said, we ought to go to court, and we ought to bring a lawsuit, because they're going to lose hundreds of thousands of ballots, maybe purposely or maybe just through incompetence. But we have a lot of our votes come in, many, many, big percentage, whatever it may be. But a tremendous percentage, much more than half, come in with the mail-in voting. And we have the post office say they can't do the job. So wouldn't you have to make a change?
Well, I mean, it's interesting because I think it was yesterday, the U.S. Postal Service Union endorsed Kamala Harris. So how do you trust an election? How did you trust a debate where the moderator is the sorority sister of Kamala, and now you've got mail-in ballots being trusted into the hands of people that just endorsed Kamala Harris? That union, how do you know there's going to be a clean election?
Well, they've always been a very Democrat union. That's the way it is.
Right.
We have people that like us, too.
So Donald Trump, in a way, didn't rise to that second question, because I think the interviewer was trying to get Donald Trump to say, "Oh yeah, these are all lefties who are going to sort of intentionally swing it for Kamala." I think he wanted to say, "Actually, quite a lot of them like me," which was I thought somewhat Trumpian. But Mark, tell us how this election is going for your members, because I mean that's an awful lot of scrutiny. I mean, Donald Trump did say at their point, like maybe they're going to intentionally dump loads of voters. I know there is sort of, it's a very polarized country. Are your members finding themselves sort of under pressure here?
Well, we're certainly under pressure to serve the people of the country and to rise to the occasion. The United States Postal Service is having some significant problems with service. But that doesn't mean that we're not going to be there for the people of the country, including postal management, be there for the people of the country, and a lot of extraordinary measures are put in place to make sure those ballots are there on time. But I just do want to share quickly. This is Donald Trump. Don't forget, this is the person that led the big lie that the 2020 election was stolen, that he actually won. Doesn't matter how many court cases, 64 ruled against him, how many recounts, how many audits. And a lot of what he was saying with that big lie, it was because of election mail, which is part of the big lie. It's a proven system. It's a trusted system. It's a popular system. Almost half the people in 2020 who voted in the presidential election then voted by mail. And that was in the middle of a pandemic. And we're very proud of what our members and the other postal workers did to give the people of this country, of the United States, 65 million people voted by mail, access to the ballot box and a cherished right to vote. So all that you're hearing there is part of voter suppression and part of setting up another stage where if Trump doesn't win, it's somehow rigged, it's somehow the fault of postal workers, it's somehow the fault of the union, and it's all part of the big lie. By the way, your listeners may be interested to know that most of the time that Donald Trump has voted in his lifetime, he voted through the mail. So he trusts it. It's pretty good for him. But then he's saying it's not trustworthy. So we have a number of things in place. We have a national level task force with management and all the postal unions around election mail. We have local task forces in our processing facilities throughout the country whose job is to monitor mail, make sure it's cleared, and give it. They're actually moving election mail and election ballots and all the political mail ahead of other mail. So it's got real priority. In 2020, 99.7% of the ballots arrived on time. And that doesn't mean the couple that weren't counted. It just means that instead of making it in 3 days, maybe they made it in 4 days or 5 days, but there was still plenty of time to count. Same type of percentages in 2022 in what we call our midterms. So we're very confident as postal workers that we're going to be there for the people of the country. Part of our deep concern is we want that good, extraordinary service to be there every day of the year for the people of the country and the world that we communicate with. So, but we are ready. We're confident, and we think the people of the United States can certainly have confidence and vote by mail, no matter what Donald Trump says. But the union stands for maximum participation in the political arena. And the Trump forces want working people not to have access to the ballot box. And it's a whole lot easier to vote by mail than go wait for 3 or 4 hours in line. Our election day is not a holiday, right? You have to still punch the clock. You got to go to work. And it becomes almost impossible for many working people to vote. My wife and I live in Washington, D.C. We get an automatic ballot in the mail. We don't have to vote through the mail, but we can. And we vote at our kitchen table, and it's great. We can have a discussion. We can think about it. We can take our time and get it done. So we're big fans of vote by mail. There are some states in the United States, it's automatic that you have to vote by mail. And their voter participation has increased because of that fundamental change that they have made. So we'll see. But we are very proud as postal workers, and contrary to Donald Trump, we don't do it based on how somebody's voting. We don't know what's inside that ballot, but we know that ballot is somebody's vote. They're voting their conscience, and we're going to make sure it counts.
I want to just show one more clip of a very different person, because your union has endorsed Kamala Harris. Not every trade union in this election has endorsed a candidate. So the Teamsters represent freight drivers and warehouse workers, one of the most powerful unions in America. And this year, for the first time since 1996, they haven't endorsed anyone for president. And the head of the Teamsters recently explained that decision to PBS.
We are getting attacked from the far left because we didn't make an endorsement, and the far right is not happy that we are working with some Republicans to try and get some things done. So this is an opportunity for both parties, Democrats, to reestablish their commitment and look back and say something must be broken. Instead of looking to blame the leaders or the members, they should look in the mirror and say, how do we fix this? We were the working people party at one time, and it's an opportunity for Republicans who claim they want to be the working people's party. It's an opportunity for them to prove it. Support a version of the PRO Act, support bankruptcy reform, support issues that actually affect working people. And our system's broken, and it needs to be fixed in the name calling, the finger pointing. It's got to end.
Following the national Teamsters non-endorsement, local Teamsters unions, as you well know, in the key battleground states of Michigan, Nevada, Wisconsin, announced their support for Harris. And there are nearly a dozen Teamsters locals and the Teamsters National Black Caucus all supporting Harris. Do you risk looking out of step with the union rank and file?
No, I definitely don't look out of step with, because remember, we represent Democrats, Republicans, and independents. And clearly half of our membership are Democrats and half are Republicans, and some are independents as well. So we've got to represent everybody equally.
And I wanted to get your thoughts on that, Mark, because he's saying there, our members, some of them are Democrats, some of them are Republicans. We couldn't make a decision to endorse anyone. I know also he spoke at the Republican National Convention, didn't he? What do you make of the Teamsters decision? And I suppose, did you sort of ever consider, maybe because we've got Democrats and Republicans as postal workers, which I'm sure you do, every workplace is going to have a mixture of people with different political affiliations. Did you ever consider not endorsing this year?
Not this year. So look, I don't want to weigh in on the internal functionings of other unions. There's a lot what the president of Teamsters said that in normal times, more normal times, I would agree with. I think he's right that the system's broken. But in our union, we believe about a third of our members are Republicans, for example. So we represent people throughout the entire political spectrum, and we respect that, and we look at it as a strength. But leaders are elected to lead, not hide behind other things. And if we're elected to lead in legislative arena, in negotiations, in the political arena, the electoral arena, then we have to be willing to advise and encourage the members to do what we think is right as leaders for the interest of postal workers, our families, and our communities. And in this particular moment, without discussing the Teamsters specifically, in this particular moment, to give fodder to the Trump world, the Trump-Vance campaign, to me and to us would be misleading workers and would give fuel to this authoritarian, fascist, anti-worker. I mean, Trump just went on national TV with the billionaire, you know what, I shouldn't use the word so I won't, Elon Musk, applauding Elon Musk for firing workers who are either going to go on strike or went on strike or wanting to get a union. We can't give fodder to that. We can't hide behind, yes, we have 35% Republicans. And what we tell our Republican members is we respect you. We're not going to tell you how to vote, but we're going to tell you what's in the best, what we think is in the best interest based on the issues, not the political affiliation, based on the issues. If you want a job, if you want a public postal service, if you want to protect your union and the hard-earned, hard-won benefits and wages that we have, then you better vote in your interest of your job. And there's also a ton of other key issues. So I'm disturbed by anybody that's going to mislead workers to somehow that this Trump world in any way, shape, or form is on the side of postal workers. So the Teamsters are going to make their own decisions. I'm not going to criticize them. Most of the labor movement in the United States has supported Kamala Harris. In normal times, that may be a problem too, because we should not be a front as the U.S. labor movement for the Democratic Party. It's not a working class party. And that's been a weakness of the AFL-CIO, the huge federation. Not all the unions are in it, but the largest and really the only federation now in the U.S. labor movement. We should be independent. And in that sense, I agree with the president of the Teamsters. But timing is everything. And we should not be disarming our members. We should be willing to struggle with our members and do the right thing. Not just put our finger in the air and say, okay, this is controversial. It shouldn't be controversial when it comes to our jobs. It shouldn't be controversial when it comes to union rights. It shouldn't be controversial when we're fighting for unity of the working class, not a candidate like Donald Trump who's telling us who to hate and divide the hell out of us, which is the boss's game and the billionaire's game.
And Dave, I wanted to, I mean, obviously, I suppose the CWU doesn't endorse people so much for Prime Minister because you are affiliated to the Labour Party. So it's sort of, it's a given, isn't it? And as you say, that means that you get to have meetings, you get votes at a Labour Party conference. I mean, have you ever, or are there tensions in the CWU between people with different political persuasions and people who might not sort of identify as left-wing or socialist or centre-left or, any of the other labels we might apply to the Labour Party?
Yeah, there are always tensions, and our approach is similar to Mark, but I suppose the fundamental difference is that the trade union movement in the UK formed the Labour Party, so the links with the Labour Party are historical. And, if we look at the current position, the legislation that the Labour Party have just brought in, which was campaigns run by the trade union movement initially, will shift the balance of forces in the world of work back towards working people. Now, that became their policy through our affiliations and through people in the Labour Party obviously supporting that change as well. But there are tensions. There will always be tensions. We are very respectful of the right of every individual to decide who they vote for. We start every communication when we're around election time by saying that effectively. It's up to you who you vote for. But exactly as Mark said, we have a responsibility to point out to our members on particular issues that directly affect them in the world of work, and probably on things that they rely on, public services, to say, in our view, this is what this party's going to do, this is what the other party is going to do. And I firmly endorse Mark's position on that. And where we've got common ground on this, Mark, I think, and we hope that we can address this through a Labour government, through a united working class, by starting to talk about these issues more openly, is that what the problems that you face today in the world of work, in wider society, are people at the top of businesses, global institutions, financial institutions, who have mastered the art in the recent decades of extracting wealth from the value that's created by working people. Working people make the difference in businesses. And for too long, the world has been sort of seduced into this idea that there's only this group of people at the top who have got fantastic ideas, Elon Musk being one of them. So we got, these are the people who come up with all the answers to problems. It's simply not true. And we are in a position in the UK now where I think we've got to take that debate on. We've got to try and unify working class people behind good jobs, good unionised jobs, across sectors of the economy, where we don't get good jobs being undercut by other jobs. And we've got to turn that into a movement that does exactly what Mark says, that ends all of this division, this polarisation of views, where you're either 100% that way or 100%. We as a trade union movement have a role in bringing that change about, and that's one of the reasons why we've supported the Labour government this time round, because we believe they've got better policies on trying to achieve those same aims and objectives that Mark's talked about, and we've talked about primarily for working people, their jobs, their families, housing, everything that affects people, we should have a say over.
I'm going to go to a couple of comments and a question. So Ed Baldwin says, unions become stronger when we become political. Very much in accordance with you two here, sort of with that sentiment. And then a question from Trax FM, the original 103.3 Pirates. So I don't know if that is, I don't know if you can tune into that. Question for Mark: how are your union managing letter decline? And how is the state of the postal system in the US today? Really, really interesting question, because we talked before about privatization or public ownership. Right. Whoever controls the unions, whoever controls the postal service, you're still going to have the same issue, which is the rise of email means less people are sending letters. So I mean, how has that affected you guys over in the States, and how is it being dealt with?
Yeah, it is a very important question. We know this is a worldwide phenomenon. I've met with Dave, and we've met with other postal and communication unions around the world, and it's the same story. The internet has had a huge impact on the way, and not just huge, but not just fundamental, but permanent change in the way that human beings are communicating with each other. And we in the United States actually live under a law from 1970 that says the United States Postal Service has to run off its own revenue, no longer taxpayer dollars. There's been a few exceptions, like with COVID relief, but we have to be able to provide a service 6 days a week, delivering to sorting, transporting, and delivering to every address in the country, 165, 170 million addresses. Our letter mail, first-class letter mail, was the revenue driver. And so just a quick example, it peaked in 2001 at 103 billion pieces of first-class letter mail a year. That's not all the mail. That was just first-class letter mail. And last year it was 46 billion. And it's been a straight chart of about 3 to 4% decline every year. So that's a problem there. It doesn't mean that letter mail is not critical to so many people in the country, and the mail in general. It is. And we want to defend it and make sure people get the right service. But where the growth is, and I know your members know this too, and I know Brother Ward has shared this with others, the growth is largely in the package world, as well as new services that we think the United States Postal Service can and should do, and we can learn from many of you around the world, such as postal banking. But the package growth is real. So the way it's impacting us now, there's a lot of changes in the machinery. There's a network modernization plan going on look, we don't deny that there needs to be change in the network. The way they're going about it, postal management in the United States, is both chaotic, and some of it's definitely misdirected. Some of it's slowing down mail. Some of it's diminishing services to rural America. And we live under a law that says everybody's supposed to get equal services. So we definitely have some challenges, some angst about the way it's being done. But we do have to accept as a union and postal workers that this fundamental change is real. We had what was called the Pony Express at one point in the history of the United States. You've probably seen it in movies and heard about it, right? The ponies aren't coming back. We're not going to stop the march of technology. We're not going to stop the march of AI. How we deal with it as a labor movement is a challenge. We believe, at least in the US, we gave up for generations on the fight for a shorter work week. Part of how to deal with automation and AI is exactly that fight. Less hours of work for no cut in pay. So all the gains of automation don't go into the pockets of the corporation or the pockets of Wall Street. So it's definitely affecting us. We've had real job loss over the decades as we've been replaced by a combination of the march of technology and the diminishing letter and mail volume outside of the package world. So we're willing to accept the need for change, but we want it to be done in such a way that constantly improves the service to the people of the country. Because every time the services diminishes, we talked about, our fight against privatization. And by the way, I believe that under Brother Ward's leadership, the CW has done a marvelous job under the difficult circumstances. And we use your example of privatization of rural mail to wake up our own members that these threats are real. If they can privatize something that's as near and dear to the people of your Great Britain states, 500 years old, twice as old as the United States Postal Service, you bet that under certain conditions, they're going to be able to do it here. So you've had a tough road, and you really handled it about as well as any leadership and union can. But the whole question of going forward, when the post office is not providing the service to the people, that becomes red meat to the privatizers. So we want to always keep that bond. That bond with the people is what has kept us from the plans of Donald Trump and others. And so when they break that bond, then we're in trouble. And so we are very concerned as the Postal Service moves forward. They do it in a pro worker and a pro postal customer way.
And do you have the same sort of situation in the UK, where I know the CWU, Dave, are sort of constantly negotiating about the USO, so the Universal Service Obligation, and whether it will change? Are you in a similar situation? Is it under discussion about sort of changing how many days a week certain types of post gets delivered, or how many times a day?
Yeah, that's a very interesting question, because that was constantly being talked about over the last few decades, and both from the Democratic and Republican sides, from the liberal and conservative side, different think tanks. It was always, let's have less delivery days. Let's go to 5 days, not 6. Let's go to 4 days. Maybe we should even consider 3 days a week. Interesting thing with the current leadership of the Postal Service, which does have us concerned about some things. On this issue, they've been very good. So we passed a law in 2022 called the Postal Service Reform Act that actually puts 6-day delivery into the law itself. It was never there before. So that's a positive step in that direction, and that helps. That certainly helps keep the post office public. So on that front, we have advanced, but there are those that are constantly trying to undermine what we do, trying to get pieces of what we do for their own private profit. When we talked about your privatization, a lot of the postal work in the United States is privatized, but it was done by hook and by crook. So you have what we call pre-sort discounts, which are for the big mailers. They get mail pieces at less cost, and then they share the cost with the people that are feeding them the mail. But that keeps mail from being processed in our processing plants. It stays off our trucks, and it's brought to what they call the last mile in the U.S., which is the most expensive piece, because the Postal Service goes everywhere, and UPS or FedEx or DHL or Amazon can go wherever they want to and wherever they think they can make a profit. And where they don't want to go, then people are left out in the cold. So there are a lot of ways. Most of our mail processing in the United States is now done in the private sector side, and then dumped into the post office in the last mile. So that threat of privatization takes different forms in different countries. In countries, we've been able to keep at bay that full-blown privatization that Trump wanted, but there's been a lot of private sector privatization that has gone on by hook or by crook with this pre-sort discount system.
A similar situation here. I'm not sure if it's with the sorting here, but you get the private companies skimming off the profitable delivery route.
I mean, I should have said that one of the differences, I think, Mark, earlier in the UK and across Europe, was the liberalisation of postal services. So what that did, under the pretense that customers were going to get more choice, that created the first step towards privatisation that almost made the next step a lot easier for the politicians to argue. And that was presented then to the public as, this is going to be fantastic. You're going to get more choice as to what postal provider you use. But it's proved to be a disaster. It's proved to be exactly what Mark said, in that they starved then the company of being able to be profitable. They share the profits to these other companies who can choose where and when and what they actually deliver, and then what they don't make any money out of, they dump back in to the postal service. And unfortunately, the UK was one of the first countries to argue for liberalisation of postal services, and then it came in across Europe. But your other point, Mark, about I think our members will resonate with the point you made about chaos on the front line caused by the way that management are approaching these things. We would argue that the Royal Mail has no long-term vision for the future of postal services. Everything is done on the basis of the short term. Across Europe, we've seen the universal service absolutely decimated. Now, that's right. The only countries that sort of stand out as 6 days is the UK and Malta. Even France, Germany now. Germany's moving, as we understand it, to 3 days a week. They were 6 days. They're going backwards on it. And the decline of letters and the acceleration of that letter decline has had a big impact on that thinking. I mean, in the UK, we had something like 20 billion letters that were being delivered in 2004. And today, about 2023, it was about 7 billion. And that's going to continue,
Right.
but it won't go completely. And what we have got to do is find ways of dealing with change, but creating new and different roles for postal workers and for the postal service to be able to show its value to the public. And this is one of the areas where we believe the CW, Mark knows in our international conferences when we all talk about this, we try and take examples across the world on how we diversify services to grow jobs, grow revenue for the company, and protect what we see as a really valuable asset. One thing I think is interesting is this. In this digital world, postal services are the only physical link in terms of infrastructure across a whole country. So if you take the pandemic, how valuable was it for the country and the government of the day in the UK to use postal workers to deliver and collect the test kits that got us out of the pandemic situation? Now, surely there's going to be a need for those things going forward. And I think our job, one thing I'd say on change, it's a real hard battle, Mark, with sometimes obviously business leaders who are very short term in their thinking, don't come up with any real ideas other than cut this, cut that to make the money at the end of the day and boost their own pay packets at the same time. Whereas with your own members, we have to be able to be very clear that unless we accept the need for change, the job will not exist at all. Now, my view is when we talk to our members about that, if you talk to them in groups, a lot of them will acknowledge that. If I meet postal workers in the street, as I often do, and I speak to them, and now they'll maybe say to me, what about this? What are you doing about that? But when I say to them, do you believe that change is necessary? They all say yes. But they all say, but we don't like the way the company are doing it. And we've got the same problem you've got there. We've got to take ownership of that debate. We've got to drive the change so that there is a sustainable and successful future for Royal Mail, for its customers, and for the company and for the workers.
I suppose in a way, is the difference in America because you're still nationalised, essentially, that you can, or that the postal service there is able to lose money for a bit longer, potentially, than the postal service here because it's privatised here. Is that the case? I think it has been losing a fair amount of money the last few years, hasn't it?
It has been losing a fair amount of money, largely based on the mail mix change that I was sharing. And we don't get taxpayer money. There certainly may be a point because we're not privatized. Maybe we can absorb more of that. But at some point under the law, the United States Postal Service needs to generate enough income to carry out the service, or we need to change some of the ways that we derive income. So it's definitely a challenge. I said earlier, we're in negotiations for on behalf of 200,000 postal workers, but we're negotiating with a company that is financially stressed. So that makes even the basic negotiations for a new collective bargaining agreement, a new union contract, that much more challenging. And so, just like CWU, the APW, just is going to do the best we can, rallying the people of the country and rallying our members for both a better life for the workers and a better postal system for the people.
I know you've got a hard out in 6 minutes' time, Mark. So I want to give you sort of both your final thoughts, and I'm going to give you complete free rein. You can talk about whatever you want. What's your message, I suppose, to people in the UK, members of the CWU, Mark?
Well, certainly we bring messages of solidarity. We stand with you in your fights for a better life, for public services, for the common good. You have a very challenging and difficult path. We saluted your strike action over the last few years. You had to do it. I know it wasn't easy, but we applaud you. We stood with you. And look, I think we can't get away from the challenging political times that I shared in the United States. We know that the Trump world is having an impact throughout a lot of the world, particularly Europe. The divisions, the anti-immigrant fever, all of the anti-worker, anti-union thrust. And we got to be able to unite as a working class, deal with the facts, deal with the issues, and reject the corporate game of division. Realize that whatever the differences are, whatever languages we speak, however we choose to worship or not, whoever we choose to love, whatever form it takes, that fundamentally workers have so much in common. And part of that fight in common is we have to fight for democratic rights and not walk away from defending the right to vote for, which is a huge issue in the United States today. So I guess my main message is keep up the good fight. We're separated by what we call a big pond, but we're united in the spirit of struggle, the spirit of working class unity, the spirit of solidarity, the spirit of militancy. We salute again Brother Ward for all his terrific work, and we know he's not alone. Our unions don't function without the rank and file members being involved, and the unions can be and should be that path or one of the key paths for working class people to build a better life and to build that unity that Brother Dave was talking about around our common interest and the way forward against these demagogic, divisive forces that then, once we get that division, they laugh all the way to the bank. And as Dave said earlier, we want to make sure we get our share and fair share and more share of the wealth that we create for the Wall Streeters and the corporations of the world. So keep up all the great work. We stand together and carry on.
Yeah, I can't help but say I love this the tradition that American trade unionists have of calling you Brother Ward or Brother Dave.
Yeah.
It's really
Brother Mark.
it's very
Dave.
it's very lovely. Dave, it's your turn.
Yeah, I mean, look, Mark, as ever, a message of solidarity to all of your members, postal workers across America and across the world for that matter, and to say that, internationalism and understanding why sessions like this are important, and that we can actually talk about these problems in the same way that the big financial institutions, the global institutions, the bosses that we respectively have to deal with, the employers, they talk about how they solve their problems. And when they talk, they don't put the interests of workers at the top of that agenda. And that's why working together as closely as we can to solve some of these big problems, my message to your members, to postal workers in America is very similar, if not the same, to what we would say to our members. Stick with collectivism. Stick with recognizing that actually the more that you connect your industrial work with your wider objectives to look after working class people, you will be successful in both at work and both outside of work. And we think that this is a time more than ever where we are entitled to start to talk about these wider issues and their impact on work, and to try and galvanise a sense of collectivism, a sense of real innovation in our thinking. I know that listening to Mark and other trade union leaders, postal union leaders across the world, we are leading those debates about how do you reshape the postal industry? How do you make postal services important to the future? How do you keep your members' jobs? And what I'd say to all of your members, Mark, is they're not going to have a better union than what you've got currently under your leadership and all of the other leaders of the union. We are genuinely in this together, and we do that by our actions, not by just words. And I wish you every success in all of the challenges that you're facing, and I know you do the same with us, and I look forward to speaking to you again, Brother Mark.
Yeah, I'm going to adopt the American conventions as well and say thank you so much, Brother Mark, for joining us, and Brother Dave. It's been very enlightening speaking to you both. I think with the Postal Service, especially because every country has one. They're all facing exactly the same issue, which is that letters are in decline. It is so interesting sort of talking across borders to see how everyone is dealing with such a similar challenge. Thank you all for watching. That does it for this week. Tune in next week for CWU Live. As always, we really appreciate you being here, supporting us, and for your questions. As ever, we do want to hear your suggestions. If there's something you'd like to ask, someone you'd like to see on shows in the future, or perhaps you wanted to share your thoughts so far, comment below these videos. We do read them, or email us at info@cwu.org. We'll see you again next week. Until then, stick with your union.